So I just saw Killers of the Flower Moon. I could not resist sharing my thoughts and reactions and how important this film is for Indigenous people and communities and allyship, and how this is going to change or shape the future for creative storytelling, for advocacy, for allyship, and for helping people to create a better tomorrow for Indigenous people, for allies. First, what did I personally like as an Indigenous woman going to the movies to watch Killers of the Flower Moon? Warning, there are spoilers throughout, so if you don't want spoilers, do not watch this. First, what I liked about this movie is the story itself is an amazing story. The story itself was very well done. The movie has like love and tension and beautiful moments, tragic, horrible, terrifying moments. There is really a full spectrum of emotions and feelings that you can experience when you are taking this movie in and enjoying it as a viewer. So that's the first thing that I loved. The second thing I really loved is that Indigenous culture, the Osage culture, is portrayed throughout the movie. It's not just an afterthought that's thrown in there every now and then, kind of carelessly. It's really carefully embedded in every single element of the movie. It portrays itself very naturally. So I don't know this because I'm an expert of the Osage culture. I'm not. I know this because I geeked out watching a ton of interviews. So the producer and director Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio shared how thorough the creators of the film were with the Osage Nation, connecting with their chief and council and making sure that as many elements of the community were embedded and were authentically portrayed as they should be. So Chief Standing Bear, who is the chief of Osage Nation, actually shared how respectful the creators of this film were in consulting elders and knowledge keepers within the nation to ensure that the authentic story was shared, that different elements of the story were honored. That was the second thing that I loved. The culture was authentically portrayed, thoroughly portrayed throughout the movie. The third thing that I really loved about Killers of the Flower Moon is the main character, Molly. So Molly, played by Lily Gladstone, the way that Molly is played in the movie resembles so many Indigenous women that I know. Their strength, their humor, their wittiness, their ability to not be pushed around, and also be empathetic and loving to people around them. Even if the people around them maybe are doing them wrong, they still see the good in them, right? It was so relatable, and the truth of the story connecting with so many Indigenous women across the nation, across the United States and Canada, I feel like is going to come through really strong and connect us all, because we could see some of our aunties and some of our cousins and sisters through the character that Molly is, right? Especially at the ending when she confronts her husband on poisoning her insulin while she's really sick, and her subtle confrontation, still showing love but respecting herself above all, is just incredible. That moment at the end was absolutely incredible. So that's the third thing that I love. Molly, the main character of the movie, amazing. The fourth thing that I loved about Killers of the Flower Moon were that the extras are real people from the Osage Nation. Not all of the extras, but I think the way that Martin Scorsese described it is that we can't have non-Indigenous people playing Indigenous people in film, right? If they exist, if these real people exist, we need to train them or allow them, like give them direction to be extras in these movies, or to be even main characters or secondary supportive roles in major motion pictures like this one. How many like jobs were created, inspiring experiences that were had for members of the Osage Nation. And I think that that speaks a ton to the leadership involved with this project, and it's really admirable and just made my heart feel so good. So that's the fourth thing. The extras in Killers of the Flower Moon and supportive roles wherever possible were done by Osage community members. Now, the fifth thing that I loved about this movie was the ending. The ending was absolutely amazing. It was difficult for me not to cry at the end of the movie, at the very end. Right before the ending, there was a strange, awkward comedy skit at the end that seemed extremely out of place, that shared the events, kind of, okay, what happened next after the actual movie ending. People can, after watching this movie, to continue to discuss the importance of revealing true stories that have been erased from history, and how we can challenge the attempts of colonization and try to recover some of these truths in a spirit of reconciliation for all Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. So that's what my thoughts were on the ending. I'm gonna share really quick what I did not like about the movie. The one thing that I was not a fan of was that the movie was really, really long. I know this is part of telling the story. You need to not, exclude any details that either share an important truth that is essential to the authenticity of the story and honoring that truth, or if you have periods of, slower footage that allows the audience to feel certain experiences and like really deep emotions, which is justified in the topic and the subject matter of this movie. Will I watch this movie at home once it comes out on Apple TV? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. Certain scenes were a little bit triggering for me personally, and I understand that there's a lot of importance for sharing those truths, and it's not something that you can escape or run away from. But would I watch it again? Do I want to feel those emotions again? Are they serving me well? Is it necessary for me? Maybe not. But someone else who is new to learning about Indigenous history and doesn't mind these really heavy, negative, complex, intense feelings, and it doesn't derail their day like it would for me, then maybe they might want to watch it more than once. So that's the second thing that I didn't really like, is that there were some scenes that were difficult to not burst out into tears, right? I didn't want to lose it in the movie theater. Just to get through it was a difficult, uncomfortable experience for myself personally. But I think that that's what movies are about, right? Taking you on a story and on a journey, especially when you know they're true, because you can reflect on similar experiences yourself where you feel all the feels and you feel uncomfortable. So we'll talk about a little bit how that can affect Indigenous audiences. But I think it's really valuable for allies and for people of settler background that are trying to understand Indigenous experiences and to learn about Indigenous cultures to do their part in becoming aware and educated. And that's one of the things I really loved about this whole experience, because it's helping us to see a path forward to reconciliation, even if it temporarily in the moment makes us feel dark and twisty and sad. It's important because there's a lot of people out there that are being exposed to these types of stories for the first time. So if it's uncomfortable for us, we're buying a ticket and going and watching it, and maybe it's validating for us that yes, this truth did take place. Having these experiences that might be negative and difficult and uncomfortable and sad, it's also very validating and help you realize we weren't lying. This is right. This is true. Even though, that manipulation can take place in current day forms, even on the big screen, right? Seeing that manipulation happen there as well, it can be very clarifying and provide clarity for Indigenous people and for allies, settler society as well. So that's what I didn't really like about it. I should say, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It kind of, you like it, but you also don't like it. It's complicating. So the movie Killers of the Flower Moon is going to affect Indigenous communities, and I'm going to tell you why and exactly how. So first, the movie is revealing hidden truths and hidden injustices that have taken place throughout history. The major themes of the movie are greed, colonialism, racism. By having the opportunity to tell these stories in an authentic and true way that is respectful to Indigenous communities, by consulting them and having true allies on such a high level, this film is revealing some of those truths and hidden injustices that have been hidden for far too long. Now, the second thing, the sovereignty of Indigenous communities. So an amazing thing about this movie is that it celebrates Indigenous sovereignty. You can see a few points throughout the movie where Molly shares herself as being incompetent. So the Osage people were considered to be incompetent if they're full Osage blood. If they're fully Indigenous, they were considered to be incompetent, meaning not intelligent enough to make their own decisions about their resources. Sometimes I try to look back on these things and not get emotional about it, and it is what it is. So First Nations in Canada haven't had the exact same experience as nations in the United States, slightly different, but there's a lot of similarities in terms of being able to control our assets and our resources, being able to make decisions, being able to have certain rights that settlers have. So it's quite interesting because now, after treaties and agreements with the Crown of Canada, at least, are getting kind of rectified and getting dealt with and settled, it appears to many people that aren't aware of history that Indigenous people have like extra, privileges and extra rights. But when you look back on stories like Killers of the Flower Moon and the Osage Nation, having resources, having like less rights, that's more often, and that's more of the true stories that you will hear that have been kind of erased because they're so shameful. But to have these stories shared on a platform in a form of entertainment in an environment that is intended to be entertaining will allow for non-Indigenous people, even Indigenous people that are disconnected and still learning about the history and learning about the truths themselves, to help them to take a step forward in reconciliation, to learn about the truth, and to do so in an environment that is accessible, that is even entertaining, that may be a little bit triggering and upsetting and dark, but in a way that, includes some amazing stories that are entertaining and might be kind of camouflaged by entertainment because it is a movie starring some of your favorite actors. So the history has a natural ripple effect that has caused continuous oppression of Indigenous communities across Turtle Island, right? United States and Canada. So the murders of the Osage women are some of the key plot points of Killers of the Flower Moon, and it brings attention to the campaign that is bringing awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous women that is sometimes distant from regular settler society that doesn't connect with some of these campaigns, right? They read about these stories, maybe they don't pay attention to them because they have no connection and they can't relate to them. I feel like this movie sharing a story in an eloquent, beautiful, tragic, terrifying way of the killings of the Osage women can help you to feel connected to them, to have an emotional reaction to these characters in the movie, but real Osage women in real life that lost their lives, so that you can understand what the existing problem that is happening still to this day with so many missing and murdered Indigenous women, and maybe make a connection as to why this is continuing to happen. Not saying that every Indigenous woman that goes missing or murdered is because a man is trying to marry them and steal their money. That's not what I'm saying, but there is a continued trend of this happening. It is clearly a problem, and having more awareness drawn to the fact that the government and the justice system overlooks Indigenous women being victim and being missing and murdered in communities across Canada, across the United States, has been happening since well before the true events that took place from Osage Nation and Killers of the Flower Moon. If you don't know someone in your community that has been murdered or that has gone missing, or you haven't had any reason to feel emotional or empathetic or triggered by these types of stories, then this story is hopefully one that can help you to understand that the justice system overlooking Indigenous women being murdered and going missing and being victim to abuse and these tragic, horrible situations, it can help you to see that this could happen really easily and that it's been happening for a really, really long time and is still happening today. So Killers of the Flower Moon is also really important to Indigenous communities because it is a celebration of authentic Indigenous storytelling. You might say that it wasn't created or produced by an Indigenous person or an Indigenous director or producer. However, the amount of relationship building and consulting that the producers and the actors did with the Osage community, it is an Indigenous story that is authentic. They made the effort to go through and ensure that everything is authentically shared, that their culture resembled the true stories that the descendants of the victims and those that survived in the community, that their story was shared in an authentic way so that they could review it throughout the process. And I think that that goes to show that we have a lot to be thankful for in terms of really supportive allies that are making it a priority to share authentic Indigenous stories on such a grand stage, right? There is not a higher stage or a higher platform than this. My hope is that this movie will inspire more Indigenous filmmakers or allies to tell these stories in an authentic way, and to show the success that can come from telling an authentic story that is maybe difficult and dark and risky to share. However, I think the success that this story, this film has seen thus far, and having the best in the world in terms of actors and directors that are leading the path and sharing these stories and not allowing for these stories to be erased any longer. These truths cannot be erased any longer, and they are standing up and fighting for Indigenous truth and Indigenous history, and that's really admirable. And I think it will inspire more Indigenous creators, artists to get into the art of storytelling and filmmaking and being positive and resilient, and allow them to feel validated. And I think it will be a great growth opportunity for many Indigenous communities and Indigenous people across Turtle Island. Now, Indigenous people in a modern context. This movie recontextualizes Indigenous cultures in a modern context compared to how Indigenous cultures have been portrayed in other movies. The most often portrayal of Indigenous culture that you'll see is quite historic, with like teepees and horses, and not a lot of motion pictures that are on such a grand stage by some of the industry's A-list talent. So it shows how Indigenous people are not just history, right? We're still here. It shows us as being intertwined with settler society, as having wealth, as being able to fight back and being able to think for ourselves and fight for ourselves and our rights, which is exactly what this movie shares as well. The last thing I want to share about this movie, Killers of the Flower Moon, and why I think it is so impactful for Indigenous communities, is because not just the story itself, but the fact that this movie was produced and starring some of the champion allies of our generation says a lot, and can allow for people to be inspired. It can allow for Indigenous communities to know that there are genuine leaders out there who are working towards Indigenous rights and protections and working towards Indigenous reconciliation. Allies like the movie producer Martin Scorsese are investing millions of dollars to share these stories that are authentic, that are reconciling the truth that took place for the history of the United States, for the history of Turtle Island. And I think it's beautiful. It shows that it means something to them, and it can allow for healing to be done within Indigenous communities, because we can look at, there is something being done. There are leaders out there that we can respect and celebrate. They care about us. It can create love in our hearts that there is a better future coming. There's a lot of progress happening right before us. And I think that that is the biggest thing for myself as an Indigenous content creator, seeing a major creation, a movie creation being done on the stage on the level that it has, and done so genuinely and respectfully, and being able to entertain and excite viewers that maybe have no understanding of Indigenous history or Indigenous culture at all, but to allow them to be exposed to it, maybe to fall in love with it through these characters that are based on true people, on real people. Their traumas and their effects and the truths and the events of their life have been erased, and to be able to see why it was erased, and that the atrocities that took place and that they're finally being shared by some of these leaders is inspiring. And I think that it's going to create a lot of healing across Indigenous nations of Turtle Island, across the United States, across Canada. I'm excited to see the impacts of how this affects on the community level, on the individual, on the personal level, because it was definitely transformative for myself. And yeah, so I just wanted to share with you why I love the movie, some things I didn't really like about Killers of the Flower Moon, and why I think this film overall is impactful and important and meaningful for Indigenous communities. What do you think about the Killers of the Flower Moon and its impact on Indigenous people and communities? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an incredible day, and we'll see you next time.